In this lesson, we're going to talk about factoring. And factoring is something that we very briefly covered in the past. We talked about one specific kind of factoring. We're now going to spend some time covering all the different types of ways that you can factor expressions. So, first of all, what does that word factor mean? Factoring means writing as a product. It's the opposite or the inverse of multiplication. So we're going to start by factoring out the greatest common factor, or GCF, and that's basically the largest thing that you can divide out of both terms. If you know what it is in your head, that's great. That's good. I want to show a process just in case you don't know what the GCF is, just by looking at the expression. So the idea is we have a 14 and an x squared in the first term, and then the second term is 77x. I know 14 is 2 times 7, and x squared is x times x. 77 is 7 times 11, and then there's just one x. And so the idea is the GCF is whatever these terms have in common. And so they both have 7s, and they both have 1x. That's the only factors that are in common. So that's my GCF, or greatest common factor. In other words, if I was looking at this expression, 7 and x is the thing that I can divide both terms by. So I put the 7x out front, and then I'm going to figure out, well, what's left over if I divide that 7x out. And in the first term, we'll have a 2x, and in the second term, we'll have an 11 left over. So 2x plus 11. And this is my final answer here. I have taken an expression that was a sum, and it's now a product. If you wanted to check your work, you could multiply that 7x through, and you should get what you started with. All right, example B, I'm going to start by finding the GCF. What is the largest thing I can take out of both terms? And again, maybe you recognize both of these numbers are divisible by 6. And you could take an x out. They also both have y's. The smaller exponent is a 2, so that GCF is 6xy squared. Of course, you can always write it out if that helps. You can find all the factors of 18, and then find all the factors of 30, list out all those x's and y's, and you'll see that both terms have a 2 times 3, which is 6, 1x, and 2 y's in common. So the GCF is 6xy squared. I'm going to pull that out front, and if I divide that out, I'm left with a 3x minus 5y. And that's my final answer. Once again, I could multiply, distribute that GCF if I wanted to check my work. Now, the second method I want to show you in this lesson is called factoring by grouping. And this is a method that's going to work only when you have 4 terms. So factoring by grouping is something that will work when you have 4 terms. So here's my first example. And so basically what we do here is we group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms together. And we factor those separately. So the first 2 terms I can pull out a 5x, and I'm left with an x minus 4. And then I look at the second 2 terms, and I can pull out a plus 2, and I'm also left with an x minus 4. And the idea is, because we got the same thing in the parentheses, this x minus 4, and that has to happen, because we got the same thing in the parentheses, we can pull that x minus 4 out front. That, in a sense, is the new GCF. And we are left with a 5x and a plus 2. And that's our final answer. So grouping is only going to work if you get the same thing in the parentheses. If you don't, it means maybe you made a mistake, or maybe just grouping isn't going to work in this problem. All right, let's do 2 more examples. Once again, I have 4 terms. So I'm going to group together the first 2 and the second 2. And in the first 2, I can take out a 3 and an a, and I'm left with a minus 2b. In the second two terms, well, technically I can't take anything out. If that happens, you can always pull out a 1. Although I notice that I need the thing in the parentheses to be the same. I need it to be an A minus 2B. I need to change the signs here. And so what I'm going to do is actually pull out a negative 1. And what that will do is change the signs. So the minus A will become a plus A. And if you divide 2B by negative 1, that should give you a negative 2B. And this is a good thing because now I have the same thing in both parentheses. And so I can pull that A minus 2B out front, and I'm left with a 3A minus 1. All right, for our last example, I want to combine the two methods we have looked at or have talked about. This particular problem has 4 terms, so we can probably factor it by grouping. However, this problem also has a GCF, or greatest common factor. And so I think it's a good idea to always look for the GCF first and then try to factor using other methods. However, it turns out you can do the grouping and then the GCF, and I'll actually show you both ways. So in this particular problem, the first thing I notice is we can pull a 2 out of all 4 terms. And let's see, is there anything else in common? No, this one has just V's, that one just has W's. But we can take a 2 out of all 4 terms, and then I'm left with V squared minus VW minus 7V plus 7W. And now I have 4 terms, so I'll group the first 2 and the second 2. In the first 2, I can pull out a V, and I'm left with V minus W. In the second 2, I'm going to pull out a minus 7, because then I'll be left with a V minus W. Same thing in the parentheses, the V minus W comes out front, and I'm left with a V minus 7. And then this 2 that we pulled out earlier will just stay in the front. And so my final answer has to include that GCF, that 2 is in the front, and then V minus W, V minus 7. Now, I did say before, if you miss the GCF, or if you don't want to pull the GCF out first, you can actually do the grouping part first, but then you have to keep going. So same problem. We can group the first 2 and the second 2. Now in the first 2, I'd probably pull out a 2V, and then I'm left with V minus W. And then in the second 2, maybe I'll pull out a minus 14, and I'm left with a V minus W. So the V minus W goes out front, and we're left with the 2V minus 14. Now, we're not done with this problem because that 2V minus 14 has a GCF in it. I'm going to finish the problem by pulling a 2, and I'll just put that in the front, out of that second set of parentheses. So the 2 gets pulled out front. I'll just copy this V minus W down. When I take the 2 out, I'm left with V minus 7. And there's the exact same answer. So don't forget to look for GCFs. In fact, as we continue through this chapter, continue through other factoring lessons, I think it's a good idea to get in a habit of just looking for a GCF before you do anything else in a factoring problem. And then the idea is if you have 4 terms, grouping is a great method to try. That's it for this lesson. As always, let me know if you have any questions.